A slap of cold wakes you, sharp as a hand, as if winter has come to test whether you're still dreaming. Your breath fogs a fraction of an inch from your face. The quilt at your chin is crusted with frost where the air finds it. Outside, the day is a hard, colorless white. Inside, the embers are everything. You reach without looking. The stove door is warm under your hand, the cast iron tempered by last night's careful husbandry. The coals glow like old coins, patient, stubborn, alive. For a moment, you simply listen. The thin tick of settling metal, the faint rasp of a slow draft through the chimney. Somewhere in the house, a child stirs. Buck the dog sighs. The difference between a morning that ends with coffee and a morning that ends with bundled bodies and a long walk to town is measured in how you treat those embers. They knew a science we've mostly forgotten: how to make a small, crude interior resist a great, indifferent sky. The frontier families of Montana did not rely on luck. They engineered warmth from the materials at hand, choreographed their labor, and practiced rituals so exact they became second nature. Today you will step into one of those routines with the Morrisons as your teachers, not to romanticize, but to understand the craft that kept infants breathing and old men warm through 40-below nights. Thomas Morrison slides a poker between glowing coals with a slow, assured motion. He does not stir blindly, he coaxes. Your hand follows his, palming a piece of split oak to nestle among embers. Oak and hickory are the weight-bearers of any winter fire, dense, slow to ignite, and when they become coal, they hold heat for hours. Pine is for morning, bright, quick to flame, good for kindling, but prone to snap and spit where resin pockets cling. The family keeps both in measured supply, the softwood for the quick light, the hardwood for the night's endurance. You watch as he builds the kindling. It's a small structure, 2 crossed bundles with a tiny teepee of bark and shavings at the center. The secret is not grandeur, but proportion. Kindling thin enough to catch from the faint ember, arranged to feed air rather than choke it. He leans in, cupping his breath once or twice over the coals. Gentle, steady breaths that coax the embers without dousing them. Too strong a blow and the bed will scatter. Too weak and the coals will smolder, producing smoke and tar. It's a balance learned by sleepless nights and quiet recoveries. The damper in the stove is the other hand at his back. A turn of the wrist throttles the draft. A small crack invites the fire to breathe. You learn that airflow governs not only the burn rate, but the character of the flame. A closed damper preserves coals, banking them into a bed that can survive the long cold of the night. An open damper produces bright fire and quick warmth, but consumes fuel like a hungry guest. The Morrisons run the stove with an economy of motion, modulating drafts until the cabin becomes a calibrated microclimate. You kneel to the basin set near the stove. Snow, gathered the evening before when the day allowed, melts slowly in a black iron pot. The water is gray with soot at the rim. It will be strained and reboiled. Melted snow is not a simple convenience. It is the family's water system. Wells freeze, streams ice over. The chore of turning winter snow into clear drinking water is routine and ritual, performed with care to remove grit and to save warmth. Sarah Morrison stirs the pot with a wooden ladle and hums a thin country hymn under her breath, the melody flattened by the cold, but steady as her hands. The kitchen is a choreography. Children are wrapped in layers: wool shirts, a second wool shirt, a knitted vest, a skirt or trousers of heavy linen, then a woolen outer coat. Mittens are stuffed with hay or rags when new wool is thin. Leather soles are greased to keep out moisture. Boots come off in the threshold, placed on a plank raised off the floor to preserve the house's heat and to let them breathe. William, the eldest boy, carries a small sled bristling with kindling, thin sticks that will feed the stove until the larger splits can be coaxed alive by the coals. Attention to clothing is as important as attention to fire. Layering is not merely piling garments. Each layer has a function.
The innermost is wool next to skin when possible. Wool wicks moisture, keeps warmth even when damp. Outer garments trap a pocket of warmed air. Mittens, when paired, create a double barrier that lets you work without losing too much heat. Face grease, a mixture of tallow and lard, sometimes scented with a scrap of tallowed pine, was used against windburn and to protect cheeks from ice crystals when a day's work in a storm is unavoidable. This is not superstition. It's instinctive home medicine, learned by observing what keeps the skin supple and what flakes away. At the threshold, you pause. Outside, the snow squeaks under your weight, tiny crystals snapping against one another. The sky is a flat oyster shell. A wind gnaws at the edges of the woodlot. Today's list is long. Fetch the morning water. Tend the stoves. Pack a sled for the trip to the woodlot. Patch a window where the oiled paper has begun to loosen. And check on the McClintocks before the weather closes in. As you step into the yard, you feel the air compress around you. Oxygen, colder, denser. The sled runners rasp over crusted snow. Buck's breath fogs as he runs ahead, and circles, then settles to watch. The Morrisons have 2 sleds. A smaller hand sled for kindling close to the cabin, and a larger freight sled with runners shod in iron for heavier loads. The big sled takes a team of oxen when the road is plowable. In leaner times, it is pulled by dozen hands or a pair of horses. Attention to clothing is as important as attention to fire. Layering is not merely piling garments. Each layer has a function. The innermost is wool next to skin when possible. Wool wicks moisture, keeps warmth even when damp. Outer garments trap a pocket of warmed air. Mittens, when paired, create a double barrier that lets you work without losing too much heat. Face grease, a mixture of tallow and lard, sometimes scented with a scrap of tallowed pine, was used against windburn and to protect cheeks from ice crystals when a day's work in a storm is unavoidable. This is not superstition. It's instinctive home medicine, learned by observing what keeps the skin supple and what flakes away. At the threshold, you pause. Outside, the snow squeaks under your weight, tiny crystals snapping against one another. The sky is a flat oyster shell. A wind gnaws at the edges of the woodlot. Today's list is long. Fetch the morning water. Tend the stoves. Pack a sled for the trip to the woodlot. Patch a window where the oiled paper has begun to loosen. And check on the McClintocks before the weather closes in. As you step into the yard, you feel the air compress around you. Oxygen, colder, denser. The sled runners rasp over crusted snow. Buck's breath fogs as he runs ahead, and circles, then settles to watch. The Morrisons have 2 sleds. A smaller hand sled for kindling close to the cabin, and a larger freight sled with runners shod in iron for heavier loads. The big sled takes a team of oxen when the road is plowable. In leaner times, it is pulled by dozen hands or a pair of horses.
The art of hauling fuel in winter is logistics. Timing your forays when the snow's condition favors sled travel. Selecting the right wood to cut and carry, and loading so that the runners do not drag. The woodlot is a managed economy. The family does not fell the biggest trees at once. They harvest in rotation, leave seed trees, and rely on knowledge of species to plan for seasons to come. Thomas pauses at a line of trees and taps a hickory trunk with the edge of his axe. The grain gives a dull, sonorous sound that indicates a dense heartwood. The Morrisons favor oak and hickory for the core burns, birch and maple for medium burns, pine and spruce for quick catches and drying splits. Each species behaves differently when split and dried. The labor of seasoning wood is an investment in sleep. Splitting is a lesson in geometry and patience. Thomas sets a block of wood on the sawhorse and raises them all. The swing is not brute force alone, it is placement. A wedge begins a crack. You learn to read the line of the grain and to set the wedge where it will ride the natural seam. The 2-man crosscut saw, when a larger tree is felled, sings a rhythmic song.
pull, push, rhythm, slow breath. The tools are marked by use, the maul's handle darkened by sweat, the axe's pull nicked by missteps. These are not mere instruments, they are extensions of the body. Through them, the family shapes its survival. Back at the cabin, wood is stacked with intention. Indoor wood is reserved for the stove, kept in a rack near the hearth, but not so close that it dries and surrenders its oils too quickly. Outside stacks are split and set on end to shed water, with bark facing to one side to encourage airflow. Seasoning takes a year at least. Unseasoned wood smolders and fouls your stove, creating tar that clogs the pipe. The Morrisons rotate their supply so that the oldest, driest billets are those destined for the longest burns. This is fuel science in its simplest form. Dry wood burns hot and clean, wet wood wastes energy. You turn to the stove, watching Thomas lift the iron lid and lay a split of seasoned oak in the bed. He showers the bed with a breath and a sprinkle of kindling, then arranges a poker to block the draft for a moment, encouraging slow ignition. The coals accept the new piece with a muted hiss, then glow brighter. The family watches, not in anxiety, but in practiced focus, as if this were a small domestic miracle performed daily. For them, it is. Between chores, Sarah repairs chinking. The double wall of their cabin, an inner and outer timber skin with a cavity, has been filled with moss in spring and then tamped with chinking. Today, she adds a paste of clay, ash, and hair. The mixture is gritty and cold in your hands, but when pressed into the seams, it seals the wind and holds the heated air inside. Hair, animal hair, usually from sheep, acts like fiber in a mortar, binding the clay and helping it resist cracking when the wood moves.
You press the mixture into the cracks with a gloved hand and smooth it into a firm bead. It is not pretty, but it is effective. In the mind of an outsider, the chinking looks like mere mud. In practice, it is engineering, a flexible, insulating seal that compensates for the movement of wood in changing temperatures. The double wall itself creates a buffer. Between the skins, moss or straw traps air. Air is itself a poor conductor of heat, and the trapped pockets reduce the exchange of interior warm and exterior cold. The sod roof, where the family can spare the time for maintenance, provides mass that resists thermal swings. The raised floor lifts occupants away from the cold ground and into a warmer layer of air near the ceiling, particularly when bedding is arranged in upper reaches with heated stones. Heated stones are another piece of the household toolbox. After the stove has burned long into the day, stones chosen for their density and resistance to cracking are heated and placed carefully in a cloth-covered box. At night, they are slipped into the bed or tucked under the quilts to radiate a slow, even warmth. The practice sounds primitive, but it's ingenious. Stones hold heat for hours, releasing it into the sleeping mass without the convective losses of open fire. The Morrisons warm their baby's cradle with such stones, wrapped first in fabric to avoid direct contact with the skin, and time their placement so that by midnight the bed is already a pocket of stable temperature. You are invited by Sarah to help remake one of the window treatments. Parchment and oiled paper, secured in simple wooden frames, soften the wind. Heavy quilts and pieces of canvas are mounted on a second inner sash to provide an additional layer when the nights bite. She clamps a wooden bar and slides an oiled sheet over the glass. The worn paper diffuses light and keeps drafts at bay. It's an improvisation that preserves daylight and blocks wind with minimal loss of clarity. The house breathes as you work, settling, exhaling small jets of warm air out through seams and joints. There is a rhythm to the labor, punctuated by small satisfactions. A cleanly split log, a chinked seam that resists a draft, a kettle humming toward boil. Yet always there is an eye toward contingency. A weather reading is made not by thermometer alone. The neighbors exchange signs.
The old man Patterson will step outside, squint at the sunless line on the horizon, listen to the day's bird calls, and in a way you learn to trust more than charts. When the light goes hard and the horizon tightens into a steel edge, the town lowers its scale. Fur-lined collar higher, extra rations set aside, the woodlot visits compressed into quick strikes. By mid-morning, a neighbor comes calling, young Alice McClintock, cheeks already flushed with intrusion and cold. The McClintocks have a small hearth and a lot of trouble. Their roof sags in a place where the winter's weight has settled on a weak beam.
Thomas listens, his expression tightening in a way that is neither surprise nor alarm, but a recognition of the arithmetic of scarcity. In a community of settlers, every house is an island with fragile bridges between them. Resources are finite. Generosity is choice and strategy. The Morrisons prepare a plan. Thomas will take the larger sled and a hand of men to shore up the McClintock roof, bringing additional shingles and a strip of sod to reinforce the sagging seam. Sarah, mindful of legal frostbite and the McClintock's thinner clothing, packs a bungle with extra mittens and a small pot of warmed tallow for the children's cheeks. The plan is precise. Repairs, fire management lessons, and a small supply of seasoned wood that will buy the McClintocks a week of safer nights. It is aid and instruction combined, the true model of community endurance. You hitch the sled and notice the subtle art of packing. Heavy billets go nearest the runners to balance pull. The lighter bundles sit higher, lashed with hemp rope to the frame. Men and older boys brace themselves, and the team moves in a practiced cadence. The sled glides. It rides on a crust that favors runners. Where the snow is too soft, laborers shift weight and break trail with shovels. In this work you see how survival includes the social technologies of trust. Who shows up? Who can pull when others are down? Who has the skill to mend a roof before a storm becomes a collapse? On the way, Thomas teaches William how to read the route. He points out a drifty spot where the wind will shape a snow shelf. He warns against the hollow under the old fence line where a melting stream has left a blind seam. These are small skills that in a storm decide whether a sled sticks or slides, whether a foot sinks to a wet ankle or stays on firm crust. The boy learns by watching and by repetition, the way the elders had learned before him. Back at the cabin, there's time for a brief explanation you had not asked for but receive because it matters. The coal bed in the stove is like a bank account. If you spend too lavishly in the evening, fast-burning wood, wide-open damper, you will have nothing left for the dead hours before dawn. To bank a coal bed, you keep a thick layer of coals and small embers, tamping down the airflow so combustion slows and heat lingers. That bed will hold for many hours if undisturbed, and when the dawn comes, a small cup of kindling and a measured breath will bring it back to flame. Coal bed banking sacrifices bright fire for endurance. It is a choice of strategy over comfort. The gasps of a child outside drag your attention back to the present. A sudden gust has set up a small whirl at the lane. The McClintock's roof looks worse from a distance. You and Thomas exchange a quick, efficient plan. Secure the house, not cosmetic repair. Focus on weight bearing. A rope, a few pegs, a careful packing of bales of hay beneath the sag will relieve the stress until more solid work can be done. The Morrisons do not promise permanence, only stability through the storm. That is the ethic of the frontier, durable improvisation. As the day draws toward its colder hours, you return with the freight sled nearly full and a mind full of small lessons. The kitchen table is strewn with tools, wedges, a small hand adze, a block plane, a candle stub. The stove hums. Inside, the home is a tight organism of warmth and work. Outside, the day tightens its belt and prepares to pull the scene into the long blue twilight that marks the approach of a true night. You sit for a moment on a wooden bench and listen to the house sounds.
A child hums in the next room. The dog moves restlessly, ears pricked. The horizon at the window is a strip of ash. The wind has a howl like a distant rope. In the neighbor's yard, you see a plume of smoke fall differently than usual, more shallow, an indication of a wind shift. Nothing in this morning was accidental. Every motion was a trade-off. Survival, you begin to understand, is an economy. Before the next task begins, allow a small reflection. The techniques are not exotic. They are low-tech physics and plain human management. Air, mass, insulation, rotation, and trust. Yet each is embodied in ritual and habit. The Morrises do what they do the same way because repetition equals reliability. Where some modern households might rely on a single mechanical comfort, the Frontier family relied on redundancy. Layered clothing, layered walls, heated stones to supplement stoves, watches at night to monitor coal beds, and a network of neighbors who cross thresholds when the weather threatens too much. A small, unobtrusive question hangs in the air, as deliberate as the cup in your hand. Do you, with the modern conveniences you take for granted, know how to begin from nothing? It is not a condemnation, it is a prompt. If you want to follow the Morrison steps, if this reconstruction speaks to you, then like and subscribe so you can keep walking this path with them. It will not take you long, but it will take attention. You rise and step back into the cold for the afternoon's heavier tasks. The weather reading Patterson muttered over the fence in the morning sticks with you. There are blue curtains at the horizon now, the deepening sign of an Arctic swell moving across the plains. The men who remain in town whisper about a storm on the telegraph. Here, you watch the sky and the birds. Where the gulls fly low and in odd circles, trouble follows. The family's list grows. Reinforce the sod roof where wind has loosened the turf. Stack an ember-ready bed of wood near the stove, double the watch schedule for the coming night, and secure the line shack in the far field where the oxen and spare equipment are kept. You go to the line shack. The little structure stands a quarter-mile from the house, a square of rough-hewn logs with a single low door. It holds extra grain, tools, and a spare stove. Today, it will be a staging point. The Morrisons move like the house itself, economical, deliberate, ready. Night settles. You lay the first heated stones into the cradle of blankets with a care born of many nights' experience. Not too close to where the baby will lie, wrapped in an outer cloth to take heat by conduction rather than by flame. The child's cheeks bloom with warmed color. The stove purrs. Outside, the wind is a wheel of sound that turns and turns. The family draws a breath and begins the watch schedule. Thomas will take the first long span, Sarah a short one later. William and the older boys will sleep lightly in shifts. The knowledge that follows is communal and practiced. What to listen for in the stove, what the smell of smoke or tar means, when to push a quick flare of kindling, and when to bank the embers and let the house survive on warmth already achieved. You curl in for a short sleep before your turn on watch. The house's warmth is a staged comfort, more fragile than it looks. Each layer of preparations is a string in a net, and each string might be cut by design or chance. The Morrisons' work today has tightened that net. The coming night will test how well it holds. In the dark, you dream of the day's small rituals. The way Sarah sealed the window, the feel of clay and moss in your hands, the swing of the maul at the woodlot. A thought surfaces with the clarity of a bell. Knowledge passed down, not as lore but as applied practice, made the difference between a family sitting in its cabin counting the hours and a family packed into a line shack, hungry and exposed. That distinction is the core of what the Frontier families did. They endured not because they were lucky or hardy in the sentimental sense, but because they systematized survival into a set of repeatable actions. You wake. The stove lies low now, the coals a muted, patient glow. Outside, the night has shifted into something larger. The wind is heavier, and there is a new quality to the way it hits the eaves. The village's loneliness has a shape tonight. Smoke bands, halted trains of light against the snow, and a sound like a far-off animal in pain. Thomas stands and moves to the stove. His hands are steady. He peers into the bed, nudges a coal that is lying too exposed, and adds a small piece of oak. The fire catches with a thin, hungry lift. He opens the damper a fraction, watching for the throw of the flame. At the same instant, a cry passes the house. A neighbor's bell, a small, hurried signal that the McClintocks are at a loss. The net you have so carefully woven will have to extend one more length if the night is to be weathered. You pull on boots and a second coat, take the child's small hand for a moment, and press a wrapped stone to its feet. Outside, the sky is a roar. The trail to the McClintocks is not far, but the wind plays with your balance. The lantern throws a small, wavering cone that the cold eats in a breath.
In the margin of your attention comes the memory of the Andersons, a family mentioned in town in hushed, reverent tones. Theirs was not a tale told for thrill, it was a caution. They had run low on seasoned wood one winter and misjudged a coal bed. They paid with lives. You hold that story not to dwell on loss, but to honor the real stakes. The Morrisons speak of it rarely and with restraint, because methods matter. Every procedure you observe tonight reduces the chance of such tragedies. Hours pass, and the watch moves in its modest choreography. At your signal, Thomas rests. William takes over with a respect that is more practice than obedience. The stove, reprieved by regular stoking and careful damper work, keeps an even bed. Outside, wind thrashes, then lessens, like a breath held and slowly released. Inside, the house becomes a small island of ritual and attention. The night does not end the world. It clarifies what is essential. As the first pale band of dawn begins to edge the horizon, you allow yourself a moment of small pride and deep humility. Pride that the family and the wider circle prepared and acted on knowledge. Humility because the line between endurance and disaster is thin. The Morrisons have stitched their days together with practice. The woodlot measured and harvested, the stove managed by thrift and understanding, the insulation patched in winter and reinforced in spring. Their survival is neither chance nor miracle alone. It is the accumulation of learned acts, of neighbors who carry, of children taught to listen to a stove's breath. The sun lifts slowly, a shiver of light over a world cleaned by the night. The house exhales. In this small dawn, you begin to understand how the frontier families endured the harshest winters together, not as solitary heroes, but as a woven fabric of craft, shared labor, and mutual care. Today, you have watched the first half of that fabric in motion, the domestic engineering, the wood economy, and the early tests of community aid. There is more to be learned. This morning is a hinge. What follows will test whether the net holds when a larger storm turns its full face toward the settlement. The sun lifts and the settlement exhales, but the storm that passed like a rumor now turns its face and comes with intention. You feel it in the long hush that falls between the gusts, in the way the horizon tightens into a single hard line. By noon, the wind has turned the world into a single moving thing, a gray blade that drags snow like a net. The Morrisons tighten what can be tightened and move on what must be done next. Not just to keep their own hearth alive, but to shore up the thin lattice of help that binds this place together. Thomas gathers the men under the lean of the barn roof. There is no grand council. Plans are terse and practical. Some will patrol the trail to the corral, checking that the oxen are bedded and the picks of feed covered. Others will make a swing toward the line shack where tools and spare provisions wait, and where, if worst comes, a handful of families will sleep with animals nearby. A third party will go to the Henderson place to see whether they can take in anyone in need and to set a place for the evening's gathering. The tasks are split by skill and stamina. Children are assigned small duties, raking embers, ferrying kindling, both because it helps and because it's how knowledge is passed. The wind thickens into a gray fall, and the sleds ride heavier. At the line shack, the door takes a blow that sets your teeth on edge. The little building, meant as a way station of spare things, looks vulnerable as a soapbox in that wind. You step inside and see it in a new light. The old stove is small, cast iron, scarred by years. A second mattress lies folded in the loft. A pile of split wood sits near the back, seasoned but not as plentiful as you'd like. This is where redundancy matters. This is where communities test their reserve. You set to work making the line shack into a habitable pocket. The first and plainest rule is to keep air where it belongs, outside. The door is trimmed with moss and an extra quilt looped over its inside edge. Every seam that will take an extra bead of chinking gets it. Small cracks around the single pane of oiled paper are stuffed with cloth. The stovepipe is checked for obstructions. A slight rise where the pipe meets the roof is braced with an iron band to keep snow and slough from jamming the throat. You wedge stones around the base of the stove to help radiate heat, and plan who will take watch. Around mid-afternoon, the line shack report comes in. Trouble. A neighbor has become stranded with a wagon that stuck where a drift had hidden a hollow. The wagon carries not only a load of grain, but a child with a feverish cough and a man whose hands have gone numb after trying to free the team. Hands are counted, ropes readied, a spare harness thrown onto a sled. The Morrisons move as if they are an arm of one body. You hitch a small sled to the oxen and set out. The crossing is a lesson in reading terrain. You learn to find fords that the wind has not filled, to stay high where the crust will bear, to keep a line of runners that can be recovered if the sled digs in. When the wagon is reached, it is half buried, and the child lies under a quilt, eyes glassy. There's no time for pity to swell, there is only work. Men set to the poles with levers and ropes, and when the wagon lifts free, a cheer goes up like a small human wind. Wood is stripped from the load to burn. A spare sack of oats is given to feed the team. The child is warmed with a heated stone wrapped in a cloth and pressed gently to the chest. Hands are rubbed with warmed tallow. These are old measures, practiced and plain, and they matter. Back at the line shack, that night's danger sharpens into a single, pressing thing. The stove's coals, so carefully tended, now sit thinner than they ought. A puff of backdraft has smothered the bed, and the coals have lain in an anxious sleep. The small stove was not fed with the ration that a family at home could manage. It needs attention. A match is struck. A small breath of flame coaxed through tinder, but the wind finds the open door and threatens to blow the spark out. This is the moment that separates planning from improvisation. Someone reaches for a tin of saved matches, kept wrapped inside a ring of cardboard and beeswax beneath a lid where they will stay dry, but the tin is damp from a leak in the roof. The single match drill comes into play. A match is wrapped in oiled paper within the hand, a second match rubbed along a dry stick to kindle a scrap of cotton dipped in tallow. At the precise instant when the flame begins to take, a man shields it with his body, while another slides a small pyramid of fine, feathered shavings into the stove mouth. The spark drinks the oil, and the shavings rise in a ghost of smoke, then a thin blue flame. It is an act that feels like magic, and it is wholly the opposite. It is skill under stress. The stove blows to life, and for the moment, that is triumph enough. That night at the Morrisons, the danger is different but no less real. The larger storm pressurizes the entire day's work. Sheds sag, minor leaks reveal themselves, and the sound of wind on sod is an exacting percussion. You wake sometime after your short watch and find the stove coughing. Coals lie as if they are used to being spared. The bed has been mismanaged in the long watches. The option that sits like a bitter seed is this. If the fire cannot be revived in the stove, the family will have to depend on a body heat shelter and heated stones until daylight. It is a plan nobody wants, and yet every frontier family rehearses it. The chair comes next, a small, stout-seated thing with a curving back, made of oak and lived in by the house for years. It is used for everything, a witness in the corner, and now it becomes supply. Thomas lifts it to the stove as if offering a sacrifice not of faith but of cold arithmetic. He strikes the chair's legs with the maul at the head of the bed, and the wood splits with a sound like a small branch breaking in a storm. He lays the pieces into the stove bed, tending each sliver to the embers and adding a breath that makes them take. Taking wood that had other uses is part of practiced improvisation. You must occasionally exchange comfort for a day's survival. The chair will be mended later if need be, but now the chair's sacrifice keeps the house from going truly cold. With the stove steadied, a second set of measures is put into place. Measures learned from the practical liturgy of past winters and from rehearsed emergency protocols. If a house goes dark at night, you construct an inner pocket of warmth, a body heat shelter. It is more shelter than refuge. It is a structure made of fabric, wood, and the warmth of human bodies arranged for maximum retention. You begin the body heat shelter the way you begin any careful thing, by preparing a base. A thick layer of small boughs, spruce or fir where available, is laid out on the floor. The branches make a mattress that lifts occupants above the hard plank and traps an early layer of still air. Over the boughs, you roll in a series of quilts and canvas covers, forming an insulated platform. Next comes a frame. A pair of poles from the barn is set up as a ridge, and cross pieces are lashed to make a low tent-like support. Heavy quilts or canvas are draped over this frame and pinned with wooden pegs so the fabric hangs close to the ground, leaving only a small opening to prevent heat loss. Heated stones, the old secret, are prepared in the stove. Select stones must be dense, granite or sandstone that has withstood previous heating without flaking, and they are heated gradually so they do not fracture. You wrap each stone in wool cloth and place them into a canvas pack. The pack sits at the foot and around the sides of the shelter to create a honeyed warmth that will radiate slowly into the sleeping mass. Stones are never placed in direct contact with a child's skin. Fabric makes the transfer safe and steady. Inside the shelter, people arrange themselves by need and by physiology. The young and the old go to the center where the warmth is most stable. Those with more active blood, men who can stand a cold, take positions nearer the periphery, where they can pass warmth inward by contact. A rotation schedule is drawn up for the shelter. 2 hours on, 4 hours off, depending on fatigue and the severity of the cold. Those who stand watch at the stove are not the same who lie down in the shelter. Duties rotate to prevent one person from being both fire tender and sleeper in the exhausted way that leads to error. A clear protocol governs feeding and rewarming. Hands and feet that show the first signs of numbness are treated by gradual exposure to the shelter's warmth and by the use of warmed animal fat, tallow, applied as a rub to restore skin pliancy. Rubbing is deliberate and slow. Frantic rubbing would sore and damage. Heated stones are pressed near limbs, not directly upon them, to encourage circulation. These measures are historical practices, imperfect but relied upon, intended to stabilize a person until better care can be reached. Watch rotations must be precise and non-negotiable. At dusk, the family posted a schedule. Thomas takes the first long watch through the bulk of the night. William relieves him in the small hours. Sarah takes a shorter, more vigilant watch near the baby's cradle. The older boys take 2-hour stints supporting the stoker and watching the chimney. Each watch has simple checklists. Check the stove damper and feel the coal bed. Look for the thin smell of tar that indicates soot buildup. Listen for the hollow ring that suggests a rock in the pipe. And every hour, open the stove for no longer than a breath's count to rake coals and to reposition heated stones if needed. The checklists are like prayers. They keep attention focused on what keeps people alive. In the small hours, a new alarm goes up. The line shack has taken in a family who lost their attic to the wind.
A child has a fever, and the mother is too weak to keep watch and feed coals. The community that has been building its own safety net must now knot a new loop into it. The Morrisons move out again, steady as a plow, with a sled lit by a single lantern wrapped against the wind. On the trail, the gusts throw your lantern's light into sudden pools. You ride in a small bubble of visibility and keep to the beaten tracks. Arriving at the line shack, you find them crowded but careful. A space is cleared and fortified. One of the boys curls up near the stove and watches the coals with a soldier's attention. A single match drill is run again, this time as a teaching moment. Thomas instructs the younger men in the exact motion. Protect the flame with your cupped hand, avoid the wind's mouth, bring a small feather of shavings to the spark, and coax the flame into a pyramid of tinder before you open the stove further. It is the kind of skill whose lesson belongs more to eye and habit than to words. You practice 3 times until each hand moves with the quiet surety of repetition. Outside, the blizzard hits full. The world reduces to a white screen of movement. You feel the settlement draw inward like a muscle. The Henderson household opens its door and waves anyone who needs a nosing place inside. Their hearth has a larger stove and a loft produced for community use in times like these. The Hendersons are not grand, they have simply been prepared. Mary Henderson rubs her hands over a bowl of thinned broth and feeds it around. There is talk and quiet and the exchange of small comforts. A knitted cap, an extra strip of oiled paper for a window, a warm tallowed shoe for a child's foot that suits a neighbor. It is at this gathering that knowledge exchanges most clearly take social shape. Around the stove, people talk not only of how they cooked, but of how they cut and split, of which tree stood true last summer and which failed, of where the best patches of moss were found for double wall filling, and of the right proportions for a chinking mix. Sarah demonstrates the clay ash hair paste, kneading the cold mixture in her gloved hands, while Old Man Patterson unmasks a trick: to beat damp moss into the double wall at a particular angle so that when the wood shrinks, it does not make a straight seam for a wind to find.
The room fills with quick, practical sentences that cut through the romantic idea of frontier life and show the sinew beneath it. Systems of practice, steps repeated until they become instinct. At the same table, tender stories are told with the same even touch. How the Andersons had fared, the sober detail that their wood ran out because they had misread a rot in their pile and kept the wet logs toward the top. The news is given in measured tones. The family is honored with a slow bowl of broth and a plan to spare them a load when the thaw comes. The purpose of the telling is not to dramatize, but to teach and to memorialize. The settlement keeps its history as data. Children squat close to the stove's belly and are taught by simple demonstration. William explains why oak and hickory are prized. They hang on as coals and give the bed weight, he says, turning a split over with a poker. He shows how to place kindling in a cross or crib so that air can channel through. Pine makes a fine mouth to begin with, he adds, but don't let it do your whole evening. It eats quick. The children repeat these things aloud as if reciting a catechism, and every recitation is a small building block in the town's continuity. As the storm weakens, the neighborhood's collective work does not end. It shifts into repair and reevaluation. Roofs that were braced get additional pegs. Chinking that was hastily forced in is packed firmer. The Morrisons, who have been central to the night's efforts, take on a final run, a check on the McClintocks. Henry stands at his door with mud on his sleeves and pride in his eyes. The McClintocks' roof sag has held. Their baby sleeps with warmed stones and dreams thickly. It is a small human triumph. Aid, in excess of items, was hands and presence and instruction. In the days that follow, the settlement is a place of mending. Splits are planed. Chairs are remade from the pieces that replaced chairs burned to save coals. The Morrisons replace the oak slat that was used in emergency and glue and peg it. The household treats the lost chair not as something to mourn, but as a lesson in economies of survival. Stories move through the town.
Which roof held? Who saved whose oxen? Which boy learned to stoke a bed when his father could not? Memory is practical and applied. A week later, the Hendersons convene a gathering not of necessity but of maintenance. The weather is kinder, and with kinder weather comes the luxury of sitting across the hearth and practicing skill without the sting of urgency. The gathering is both social and didactic, a place where the knowledge that keeps people alive is polished and shared. At the center of the room, a simple table holds implements and small samples. There is a split of hickory for people to feel the weight. A sample wall section shows double skin construction with moss packed in between. A small procession of quilted window treatments demonstrates how layered sash works to reduce convective loss.
Children are set to practice striking a match in a windless corner using feathered shavings under an instructor's careful eye. Thomas stands and offers a small demonstration in front of the hearth. He shows how to bank a coal bed for a long night, rake the ashes to one side into a shallow bar, leave a thick layer of coals, close the damper just enough so combustion slows and the coals glow rather than flame, and set a small bank of kindling in the wings ready for morning. He explains why this works. The physics is plain air management. Heat without oxygen burns slowly. Oxygen in moderate turn sustains a long, even output rather than rapid consumption. His voice is not the voice of certainty, but of observation and practice. People nod and ask questions. How much grease to put on a boot? Where to find good moss? Which stones are best for heating? Answers travel back and forth like tools. Mary Henderson demonstrates chinking one more time. She mixes clay and ash and plucks hair from a small bag of sheep fleece until her hands form the right consistency. You want it like heavy porridge, she says. Not so wet it runs, not so dry it won't bind. She presses the mixture into a seam and then taps it smooth with the back of a spoon. When the wood moves with frost, that hair keeps it from cracking cleanly, she adds. An old carpenter named Emsley remarks that a lath under the chink can stabilize larger seams where the logs settle unevenly. These augmentations are not theoretical. They will be tried in the next spare hour and then assessed for winter following. Old Man Patterson sits by the stove and tells stories in his pause between demonstrations. Small stories that double as warnings and instructions. He recounts the way the lines of weather compress across the ridge, and how years ago a man misread the sky and lost a load because he banked on a trail that seemed clear. The stories stay with you because they are not grand tales but precise notes. Watch the gulls. Watch the horizon whiten. Listen for those particular low winds that strip a roof. He finishes by saying, with a smile that never quite reaches his eyes, that the settlement's true warmth is not only the fire, but the neighbor on the other side of the partition who will come when the bell rings. The Henderson gathering finishes with a small ritual. Everyone who passed through carries a small token back to their house: an extra strip of oiled paper, some spare tallow, a short length of hemp rope. These items are not much by themselves, but they are the currency of mutual aid. Before you leave, Thomas gathers the boys and offers a final piece of instruction: how to manage a sled in crust, how to keep a damper from sticking, how to save a match. We pass these along, he says, not to hoard, but so there's less searching when time is thin. The words land with geography, firm, simple, and true. Weeks pass, and the winter loosens its first fingers. Children learn to look at the sky differently. Men and women exchange small updates of where the best wood lay last autumn and which split failed to dry. The season's rhythm resumes with the extra care of those who feel they have been tested. The Morrisons, who have been central, find time to mend the chair and re-sew the baby shawl and replace a couple of shingles on the roof where the snow had tugged them loose. There is a balm in repair, an antidote to the rawness of survival. And now, in the long light after the storm, the settlement holds a communal potluck by the Henderson hearth. There's a quiet ceremony to it, sharing fried slices warmed in lard, bowls of thick porridge, a plate of preserved fruits scraped from the last jar. The potluck is not feasting in the modern sense, it is redistribution and memory. Elders speak and children listen. Skills and stories move from mouth to ear and later from ear to hands. The social habit is clear. Skills are not private property. They are the glue of continuity. At this gathering, you watch the next generation being formed. William sits with a boy from the McClintocks and shows him how to tie a hitch that will hold a sled's load. Sarah takes a child on her knee and shows how to bind a stone in cloth before it's used in a bed. These moments are quiet, almost invisible, but they are the essential trade. Skills that were once ordinary must be made ordinary again. The community's inventory of shared knowledge becomes a map of resilience. Stoves managed by coal beds, stones heated and wrapped, layered walls and chinking mixed with care, double sashes and oiled paper, careful hauling and rotation of wood in the yard, a protocol for single-match fire starting held in a tin with cardboard and wax. These are concrete things, techniques and logistics that, combined, create a systemic method of endurance. They are not romantic adornments, they are work. In the weeks and months that follow, you begin to see how these practices travel beyond necessity and into culture. The Henderson gatherings become a scheduled thing, a monthly slot where neighbors bring a problem and leave with a fix and sometimes a new trick. They teach children tools not as chores but as rites of passage. When the snow begins to thin and the first scent of thaw comes, discussions turn to how to manage spring. Which stacks of wood to keep dry for the next season? Which beams to reinforce before freeze-thaw hits? Where to plant seeds that might need more protection against late frosts? You think of the Andersons again, of what their loss taught without melodrama. Their story circulates in speech like a slow instruction. Their error was a small miscalculation of supply, the sort of miscalculation that is remediable by the community when neighborliness becomes policy and not only a feeling. Practical generosity, then, is part of the design. One family's surplus becomes another's buffer. One person's skill becomes everyone's fallback. Finally, on a day when the sun sits hard and clear, the settlement stands together to repair a fence line and to inspect the remaining sod roofs. The work is physical, but it is also ceremonial, a public standing of accounts. Hands raise and pass the tools, and Thomas watches as William teaches a knot to Alice McClintock. You watch as knowledge moves from adult to child without fanfare. It becomes part of who they are. At the close of that day, you stand at the threshold of the Morrisons' cabin and take in the house as a whole. It is not a fortress, but a thought-out organism. Double walls that buffer wind, chinking that seals, a stove tended like a living thing, stones that carry warmth into the night, clothing layered to trap the body's heat, a watch schedule that disperses fatigue, and a community network that redistributes risk. Each piece by itself is helpful. Together, they are a system that, when practiced, mitigates the worst of the winter's teeth. They endured, you now understand, by weaving technique and companionship into a single answer. The frontier families did not survive merely by stoicism or by luck. They endured because they turned knowledge into practice and practice into practicable routines, because they taught their children, because they shared tools and warmed stones, and because they made it normal to cross one's threshold and give, without theatrics, the small things that make life keep breathing. You step back into the cabin, hearing the faint tick of the stove and the soft murmur of a child's sleep. The season has not been conquered, and the weather will test again. But the net is stronger now. Tools mended, techniques rehearsed, neighbors bonded by the small economies of help. That is the heart of how the frontier families endured the harshest winters together. It was never merely one system or one person. It was an architecture of craft and community, a practical science of wood and hair and stone and human hands. If this reconstruction has spoken to you, subscribe to follow more of these reconstructions, and find a companion guide in the description with notes, diagrams, and checklists of the techniques you've seen, so the knowledge doesn't remain a memory, but becomes something you can touch and practice. When you close the door tonight and feel the stove's warmth against your palm, remember that endurance is less the product of a miracle than the outcome of repeated shared action. The right piece of wood set at the right time, a stone wrapped and placed, a neighbor who shows up at the right hour. They endured because they engineered warmth from what they had, because they choreographed their labor, and because they kept watch over one another. In that weaving of craft and community, you find the clear answer to the title, How the Frontier Families Endured the Harshest Winters Together. It was never merely one system or one person. It was an architecture of craft and community, a practical science of living made of wood and hair and stone and human hands.
Subscribe to the channel for deeper builds and a downloadable checklist that walks these methods step by step, so that the forgotten science of endurance can be learned again, not as an abstract idea, but as a living, practical heritage.